two parts. The second part would be a book discussion, but that would be preceded by a book release. So this is a great occasion when a book would be released, which has been possible due to the collaboration between the Calcutta Research Group, Asia Institute of Technology, and EMIR. The name of the book is Migrant Asia, Migrants in the Making of Asia, which has been co-edited by Priya Singh, Lydia Potts, and Paula Banerjee. So I would first request Professor Paula Banerjee to say a few words about the book before we formally release the book.
Thank you so much, Sabyasachi. This is a very interesting book. What happened was we have been collaborating with EMIR, and by we I mean Calcutta Research Group, because I am wearing three hats here. I am a visiting faculty in Karl von Ossietzky University for the EMIR program. Yes, for the EMIR program. I am now the director of CGFD in AIT, and I'm a long time member of Calcutta Research Group. So I am sort of physically embodying this collaboration. But this is a collaboration between Calcutta Research Group and the EMIR program for a very long time. Although Calcutta Research Group became a partner, official partner of this consortium in the last, let's say, 8 years, but even before that, when the program was conceived, Calcutta Research Group, and particularly Professor Samaddar, was one of the brain behind understanding, collaborating, and forming this program. And then we meaning Calcutta Research Group, came up with the idea of India-Europe platform in the field of migration studies and social sciences. In that, we brought in EMIR in that collaboration as well. And then the third phase was when EMIR wanted to have a conference in the Global South, and I, from Calcutta Research Group and Rabindra Bharati University, made a bid for that conference, and we got that. So it was decided that the venue will be in Thailand. Calcutta Research Group very graciously agreed to that. Very happy for that because of the visa regime, particularly. However, the conference took place in April, and those of us who are in the business of publishing books and writing books know that if a conference is held in April, then you don't expect a publication in November. But our ace was Abhijit Da from Front Page. I don't know why he accepts our requests. I don't see him doing professionally very well out of that, but we sort of ask him to do it and he gets it done. So Abhijit Da brought out this book in record time. It was a month, Abhijit Da, am I right? 40, he knows the dates also. And, if asked, he will also tell you the hours. Because in between that, we had millions of correspondence. And this is actually representing this particular collaboration. All the three editors of the volume, starting with the youngest editor who did the most amount of work, Priya Singh, Dr. Priya Singh, is a member of Calcutta Research Group. She is a visiting faculty for the EMIR program, part of the consortium, and she is also a member of Asian Institute of Technology. So am I, as I said, and so is Professor Lydia Potts. She is the coordinator of EMIR. She is a visiting faculty for Calcutta Research Group and Asian Institute of Technology. So in the best possible way, this is a collaboration built on friendship, not on network, built on respect, and built on enormous amount of love. Without that, this volume would not have been possible. I will not talk about the quality of the work. The authors are from one of the three institutions or the conference that symbolized this consortium collaboration. So the authors came from all over the world, but this was a byproduct of CRG's friendship with Emir, and this was also a byproduct of what CRG built as the India-Europe platform on understanding mutual relations between Asia and Europe. So having said that, I will ask Sabyasachi to maybe release the book or take the program forward. Thank you so much.
We'll release the book a little later.
Okay.
Let us first listen to Professor Ranabir Samaddar, who is the Professor Emeritus in Calcutta Research Group and also a CIFAR Fellow. Professor Samaddar.
No, 40. Well then. Order will be decided by the chair.
I received the book day before yesterday, and Paula gave me a copy of the book very graciously, but then said, you would have to speak on it day after tomorrow. So initially I didn't understand what the book was, and because I took few, and then they say book has just come out, and it will be released day after tomorrow because of the program that's going on. So I urged her to select somebody else, but evidently she had me in mind, so she said that no, this is what I have decided. So in CRG these kinds of things happen. I too have subjected others to such instant instructions and advice. Sabyasachi will bear witness to such occasions, innumerable occasions over the years. So initially I thought I would try to live through the book as much as possible. I could not. But 2-3 articles caught my attention and which I liked very much. One was, this is Article 10, the narrative of hospitality function as a form of governance, Syrian refugees in Turkey. I had read earlier quite a number of accounts on refugees in Turkey published in Journal of Refugee Studies and Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, Ethnic and Racial Studies. I know the literature a little bit, and I can say that this is a wonderful addition to the collection. Similarly, there are 2-3 other articles by which I do not intend to say that others are bad, but simply I did not get chance to go through all the articles. But the ones that caught my attention because of the theme, I remember there is one more theme which is on Bangkok, and again I quickly went through them, and I would urge everyone to, I do not know what's the price of the book, but I hope it is not, OVG does not make usually high-priced books. So apart from bringing out books in very good form, the other quality of Abhijit is that he does not price them unnecessarily high. So I hope everyone will be able to buy a copy of the book. And this one, particularly street vending among migrant domestic workers in Singapore, there is one on Bangkok. But in any case, I like the last chapter, probably because I went through all the 3 of them. And there is one on the migrant route which connects India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, on the Rohingya refugees and other people. So there are 2 things on which I would be happy, or let's say we would all be happier if the research on migrant experiences in Asia takes to that direction. I remember that Refugee Watch had come out with maybe 1 or 2 years back with a volume on migrant Asia. I tried to get hold of that copy, but since our program is being held here, I did not find the copy at home, but I am sure there is one in the library or in the office. So I look at it as a continuity of the one. But certainly I remember that Meghna Guha Thakurata had authored an article, long article, and this was, if I am not wrong, in collaboration with Anita Sengupta, where she had contributed on Central Asia and Meghna had contributed on Southeast Asia. But in any case, what I wanted to tell was that going through this book, and this is a very, how would you put it, a very, very, very provisional remark, but I wish that there be some discussion on that, that there is a specific way in which research on Asian migration is proceeding. And there is, it's not dependent on our wish. I do not think that it is deliberate. But, and the good side of that is that this trend of researching focuses on migrant workers in transition, migrant workers trying to negotiate their successive stays, places of stay, etc. However, we are leaving out two important parts of Asia, West Asia and Central Asia. And in current situation, even if Central Asia cannot be covered, because we cannot expect a book to cover the entire continent, but at least something on Central Asia. Paula herself has written and spoken innumerable number of times on Afghan refugees in abroad, Afghan refugees in India, but Afghan refugees in Iran, in Pakistan. Similarly, that's why I liked the article on Turkey, that at least it tells us it's a kind of a signpost that Asia is huge and we cannot leave the western part out of that. But the additional reason is, and I will implore, make a special appeal to Paula, that at some point of time, if she can organize a conclave on the impact of war on Asian migration and the dimension of war. Priya herself is an expert on West Asia, so I was trying to find out. And the way in which war has devastated, I'm not only thinking of Gaza right now, but I'm also thinking of Beirut, Damascus, and a number of Asian cities. One can think of Kabul also. And we have no concluding or conclusive account of actually how many people have been left homeless and how many people have died. We only get figures of Gaza, but Syria or Iraq is virtually partitioned. So I hope that one day, and it's not only an appeal to CRG, to AIT and Paula, but also it's also CRG's duty to reflect on the devastations and the forced displacement of people caused by war. Because it is not to point out, and so please do not take me wrong, it's not to point out what could have been a comprehensive thing, because you cannot have a comprehensive such thing, but at least what kind of forced movements occur in the wake of a war is something that, because of the current time, because of the situation today, is something that we must not forget. I'm thinking also of the Vietnamese boat refugees after the Vietnam War. Also, if you think of what has been termed as comfort women of the Philippines as consequence of Second World War, and even today, families are searching for their ancestry, which meaning what happened to their grandmothers, what happened to their mother of grand-grandmothers, etc. Those who were taken away from Philippines to serve as comfort women. So all in all, Asian migration, one very important part has come out in this book, and that's the part on migration, the different migrant experiences, it, as I said, that CRG had done some work on that, and CRG's leading scholars led that work. And maybe if you take it as a trilogy, so the first one came out section by CRG, the second one, Emir, AIT, CRG together, this book, and I would look forward to.
The third one is being planned.
I hope war remains, an important factor, or war is the backdrop in which, because if you read also the two global compacts on refugees and migrants, again you will see surprising, but it shouldn't cause surprise, because that's the way liberal discourse on protection forms and continues. So the background of war and devastation is something that should be brought to the attention of scholars and human rights and public activists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Samaddar. Now I would request Professor Thomas Peyer-Boer, who is a professor of migration law at the Kent University, Belgium, to offer his comments.
Thank you very much. I had the same challenge as the previous speaker, but then I cheated. I skipped a few sessions, so my apologies to people who presented while I was not there. So I was able to read the introduction and the abstracts, and my congratulations are based on that. I think the publication of this book is a significant event because it takes south migration perspectives and analyzes them as relevant for global debates on citizenship, sovereignty, and the ethics of migration. In other words, it treats Asian migration not as a case study that's only relevant for people who happen to be in Asia, and that might be a lot of people because a lot of people happen to live here, but so I, as a European scholar, then might safely ignore this. No, that's not the approach that the book takes. It analyzes these empirical studies as a field that can inform wider theories of migration and society. And I think that's much needed because, as you said this morning, it's much needed that we imagine a new normative order that challenges notions of state sovereignty, of nationalism, of citizenship, of neoliberal capitalism. And an approach like this can help in doing that by looking at a different set of locations than dominant scholarship does, without pretending that these observations are only relevant for that location. So I did not have time to read the contributions themselves, but what I admire is the sustained attention for both production and reproduction, both in their own, for their own sake and in their mutual relationship. So many contributions both analyze the economic role of migration, of labor for the sending and receiving regions, but they also look at affection, care for children, each other, for parents, for siblings, for wider networks, and then again in the sending and receiving countries. And it looks at the interaction between these two. I find that very remarkable, and I think that is an example of a theoretical contribution to migration studies worldwide. So that's not just Asia. It's something that is being figured out in these contributions that I think is very significant. Now, I will take the liberty, and I feel, I'm not sure whether I feel entirely comfortable in doing that, but I will collect my courage and share one observation about the titles of the contributions. All chapters, literally all chapters, contain a very precise indication of the geographical location of the empirical material. Yeah? But only a few titles express the theoretical point that the article seeks to make. I think that's problematic, and I regret that, because if you only say this is about X, this is about this location, then I think you participate in marginalizing your work. You pretend like, oh, this is only interesting if you are interested in Assam, and anyone who's not interested in Assam can ignore this. That's not true. Your contributions are much too important for that. If you compare that to article titles in, let's say, the European Journal of Migration and Law, I'm one of the editors, and so I know it well. These have these grandiose titles, very important general topics, and then it turns out to be about one specific French court. And it doesn't say the case of the French asylum court. No, of course what happens in France is of universal importance. Now, I'm not entirely sure that is an example to be imitated. I'm not sure that this kind of traditional European self-projection into the universe is commendable. But maybe there's something. So maybe you should think about the politics of titles, because there is a politics there. So what I would suggest is that if you think of the title of your article, don't position yourself as just a case study, and make sure in any case to include the theoretical point in your title. And I thought of the same chapter that the previous speaker thought of. So there's one chapter that says, the title is The Narrative of Hospitality Functions as a Form of Governance. And then it says Syrian refugees in Turkey. But so the point of that article is immediately clear. That's great. I would recommend that you do that you flag the theoretical contribution your article seeks to make. And maybe this is too European, maybe consider drop the geographical reference. Thank you. And so, congratulations with this book. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Professor Speerboer, for your very valuable comments. And before the book is formally released, last but not the least, I would now request Mr. Abhijit Mojumdar, the publisher of the book, on behalf of Front Page, to say a few words.
Good afternoon to all of you. After having heard Professor Banerjee, Professor Samaddar, and Professor Speerboer, I have nothing more to add, and I am not qualified to say anything about the content of the book. But on a lighter note, let me tell you one thing. Whenever I get any request from Professor Banerjee. She starts with the date that I have to submit the thing on so and so date, and you will have to deliver on so and so date. So this time I have skipped by 2 days only. My apologies for that. She said it has to be brought out within a month or maximum 1.5 months. So it took 47 days, my apologies. But always it has been pleasure working with CRG and Professor Banerjee, Professor Samaddar, and in the process I have learned so many things, particularly from Professor Samaddar in publishing. He knows better than what a publisher knows. He knows how to price the book. He knows how to select the font. Everything he knows. So I'm really benefited from Professor Samaddar. I have nothing more to add. It's a great occasion that we are going to release the book, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, and now is the time for the formal release. So friends, we are going to begin this discussion on the book. This is the book which only Professor Samaddar has a copy, the others don't.
The library has a copy.
Library has a copy, I just learned that. So, oh, many people have, but I don't.
Bola has one.
Signed and gifted. What about
Okay, so, yeah.
why have you published?
So this book has been published by the Central European University, Budapest, Central University, European University Press, Budapest, and I'm not going to say anything about the book because I do not have the copy yet. So I refrain from saying anything. So I would now request first Dr. Samata Biswas to give us an idea about the book, who has a PDF I can see. So Samata.
But you have also a PDF.
So, Nasreen, hi. Hello, hi. Right. So I am the perfect person to discuss this book because I brought it upon myself. One day we were discussing that we should discuss the book, so I said I will, and now I have this task ahead of me. But also because many of us at CRG have lived through these moments with Ranabir, in which he has shaped our understanding of what he calls crisis and what he calls conjuncture. And I will try to take you through this. Most of you are old enough to remember 5 years ago the COVID-19 lockdown and the ensuing march of the migrant workers across the vast plains of India, their deaths, but also their defiance. And it is that moment since which I feel Ranabir has really sharpened his focus in trying to understand and explain the agency of what he calls the lower classes, the poorer classes, the subaltern classes, and what he also calls, borrowing from Foucault, the politics of life. Now, this is the first year in my life that I finally got to teach Foucault in class. I've been meaning to do so for ages, I haven't. In figuring out what to teach and in trying to make Foucault interesting to my uninterested students, I told them Foucault is the most quoted author in the world, which is true. And as we are all humanities or social science researchers, maybe some of us are even scientists, we are most definitely extremely familiar with Foucault's notions of biopolitics, which is not something I'm going to define. But what we will try to engage with is what Ranabir calls biopolitics from below, which offers us a way of thinking about subaltern agency beyond the governmental lens of biopolitics that we are so used to right now. So in this, Ranabir talks of a specific kind of political action which is undertaken in moments of crisis, rupture. What is crisis or rupture? And you have to, if you become familiar with Ranabir's writing, you realize that he's extremely dialectical in the way in which he writes. He will give you, it's some Hegelian spiral that is moving upward and upward synthesizing as he's giving us two sides of something. So the crisis or rupture is the fusion of contradictions that reorganize political temporality. What are some of the examples of such crisis and rupture? They would be things like war, pandemic, famine, or economic breakdown. Biopolitics, which we are familiar with, is what governments, states do to populations, the way they deal with populations. Biopolitics from below, as the nomenclature shows us, is not from the state. It is not vertically down. These crises, ruptures, fusion of contradictions that reorganize political temporality create openings, which Ranabir calls conjunctures. So crisis and conjuncture are the two things that we are going to shift between. Subaltern groups at these conjunctures generate new modes of self-organization based on protection of life, another phrase from Foucault. Not protection of life, politics of life is from Foucault, but protection is something that becomes central to this. Collective responsibility and practical ethics. Conjunctures produce instability and possibility simultaneously. I will repeat. Conjunctures produce instability and possibility simultaneously, and while biopolitics, as we understand it in Foucauldian terms, precludes in most moments the possibility of subaltern agency, there is, according to Ranabir, the agency of the governed, which is biopolitics from below. Now, there is a practical ethics that underpins biopolitics from below. This practical ethics is the ethics of mutual responsibility, care, solidarity, protection, everyday acts to secure the condition of life. Broadly, I think there are 3 chapters and a conclusion in this very, very short book, which is only 154 pages long, of which around 50 pages are notes and indexes. So you can imagine how much he's read and then shortened in like really less than 100 pages. So he gives us the origins of, he talks about a specific moment in time when across the world, but especially in the context of India, new forms of governmental power start acting on people, and for this specific purpose in South Asia, it is 1971. He thinks the city becomes a special site for the biopolitics from below. Why does the city become special site for biopolitics from below? Because in neoliberal urban restructuring produces new vulnerabilities. We also have, and we've been discussing this for 3 days now, informal labor. There is demolition of the places that house informal labor. There is displacement. There is criminalization. Each of them faced primarily by migrant workers. But these are also the sites that produce fragile, dense practices of mutual support, a logistics of the poor. COVID-19, like I said at the beginning, becomes, in this scheme of things, is both a rupture and a conjuncture. So the crisis that enables the conjuncture. The breakdown of biopolitics from above, because, we remember that the governments did not know what to do at the time of COVID-19 with the most vulnerable population. So the refugees, the migrants, and the displaced, they did not want to know what to do with them. Governments privileged economics over human life, but subaltern groups, as we all remember, responded with organization and care. Now, this is, in the scheme of this book, a new form of public power. It is marked by horizontal solidarities. It is marked by embodied collective action and new forms of local authority. Now, to arrive at this, Ranabir comes from eclectic, and I do not say the word eclectic lightly. He truly comes from eclectic sources. So he cites the Hindi film Chakra, the Bengali film Calcutta 71. He refers to truck drivers in the United States and the Greek debt crisis. So if it were me, I would try very hard to wrap my head around one of these things, and he's done all of these. So how do we study biopolitics from below? How do we study the activism of the lower classes? Some of the instances of the crisis that turn into total crisis during conjuncture, and therefore also have this moment of conjuncture, are historically the 2007 financial meltdown in Europe, the EU debt crisis, the 2015 so-called migration crisis in Europe. But these are also conjunctures because they produce acts that create the possibility of reshaping society. Therefore, these moments are productive in nature. For many years now, migrants in the neoliberal city have been a part of Ranabir's negotiations with the city. The city, he's pushed us to think about the city itself as a migrant, but the city also producing and receiving migrants, the shadowy places which are at the same time spaces of violence for migrants, but also spaces that produce horizontal solidarity. Now, this book also comes with a preface, an introduction by Paulo Novak, which is a beautiful introduction. But I will quote a little bit from this because I think Paulo really encapsulates the beauty, but also the contradictions of migrants in the city. So I'm quoting, "They are cast as waste, but they repair. They are transformed into footloose labor by dispossession, but their mobility is hampered by state regulations. They provide care work, but nobody seems to care about them. Essential for the reproduction of the economy, but absent from the formal organization of public life. They defy the processes of invisibilization which they are subjected to through collective practices that claim and obtain visibility. Cast as residues and surpluses, the spontaneity of their lives indicates the fault lines and limits of governmental action." Very obvious when you remember the COVID-19 crisis. When you think about how exactly the limits of government action is what brought the migrant workers of India out into the roads of India. The migrant population is also a surplus population, created as surplus through the interaction of the space form, and this is, I'm now referring to Ranabir, through the interaction of the space form and the labor form in neoliberal times, in a regime for, and here he shows the example of 1971, when direct control of sovereignty is impacting on embodiment.
This is because the reproduction of life holds the key to the reproduction of labor. Life conditions that make reproduction of life possible acquire a strategic dimension which may call, for lack of better word, an ethical dimension, one of practical ethics. This brought to mind that it was Professor Arup who taught us for our first paper in MA in Economics on value theory, which included Marx as well as Piero Sraffa. In the first lecture, he mentioned as context life, which implies the conditions of life, and therefore the reproduction of life and that of the conditions of life. And then he mentioned the institutions surrounding the reproduction of life, namely marriage, and the reproduction of the conditions of life, namely economy. Subsequently, as an economics teacher, I too used to begin my first lecture of the course with the same presentation of context. As I read Biopolitics from below, reading, for instance, the sentence on page 22, "Conjuncture in this sense is the ground zero, the contingent space giving shape to new political forms," I wish Professor Arup Mallik had been around to read this and now engage with the concepts of conjuncture and crisis, as well as the context of the logistical economy and city, which form the basis of this treatise. On page 8, we read, "In this age, crisis and conjuncture allow the possibility of the formation of a parallel power rooted in subaltern consciousness. Such consciousness is essentially in the nature of a biopolitical awareness of the world." I entered the world and life of social activism in October 1984 through a chance encounter with Jai Sen, an architect who spent 2 decades in Calcutta, set up a unique and pioneering organization, Unnayan, which means development, and he inducted me into the Chinnamul Shromojibi Odhikar Shomiti, or Organization for the Rights of Uprooted Laboring People. This Chinnamul Shomiti was formed in October 1984 following a wave of evictions of squatter and demolition of squatter settlements in Kolkata during 1983-84. It was an umbrella organization of squatter communities from across the city protesting against evictions and demanding resettlement, rehabilitation, and the formulation of appropriate land and housing policies that would enable the laboring poor to reside legally in the city that was sustained by their labor. Housing was declared to be a right, a fundamental human right. Shortly after that, a settlement in Chaudhury of migrant laborers who had worked on the construction of the Calcutta Metro was demolished, and thus a fellow member of Chinnamul Shomiti, Shandip Bandapadhyay, who was a school teacher and writer, and I, who had just taken up a job as a college lecturer, took up an investigation into the working conditions of Calcutta's metro workers, and thus began my own engagement through participation with Biopolitics in my city, a 2-decade-long engagement. Subaltern consciousness. Early in the course of the focused study and reading that I also then took up, centering on housing and the laboring poor in Kolkata, I read the book Bangladesher Shong Proshonge, or About Bengal's Shong, by Bireshwar Bandopadhyay, published by the Asiatic Society. Shong was a folk performance medium of the subaltern folk, and I read about this being performed by the laboring poor in late 19th century Calcutta using handcarts to prepare makeshift stages. These performers saw through, critiqued, and vilified the Babu society and colonial rule through satire. In Biopolitics from Below we read, "The critique from below is not intellectual but practical, not solitary but collective, not programmed but episodic and sudden. This difference runs through time." More recently, translating the semi-autobiographical novel Chandal Jibon by Manoranjan Bepari, as well as the refugee and childhood memoirs of Adhir Biswas, gave me an intimate and deep insight into subaltern consciousness and its formation and expression in the city. And a few months ago, I translated 3 Bangla short stories, one after the other, all about migrant labor, including one by a former migrant construction worker. I recall that in his interview, which was published titled "It Does Not Die," Ranabir Samaddar had mentioned that since it was in Bengal that people of India first encountered the brutal onslaught of British colonialism, it was thus here that people's resistance also first emerged. The early 1980s saw the eviction of pavement dwellers in Bombay, and the journalist Olga Tellis went to court against that. That became the famous pavement dwellers case on which the Supreme Court of India passed its final order in mid-1985. The order recognized that the right to life, which is a fundamental right, includes the right to livelihood, without which obviously life is not possible. However, the Supreme Court did not grant the pavement dwellers the right to house themselves there. Meanwhile, eviction of squatters continued in cities like Calcutta, Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. The Supreme Court judgment was seen by activists as a failure of the judicial system in recognizing the right to housing of the laboring poor, which therefore needed a new housing rights law to fulfill. And so the idea of a housing rights bill was born, a people's housing rights bill that could form the basis of housing as a legal right. And thus was born the National Campaign for Housing Rights in August 1986, with the objective of drafting this housing rights bill. Through my engagement with Trinamool Samiti and subsequently Unnayan, which I joined, I was in the thick of this milieu. Subsequently, I worked as a consultant on a planning project of the government of West Bengal during 1995-97. This was the Calcutta Environmental Management Strategy and Action Plan, or SEMSAP, supported by the Overseas Development Authority of the Government of the United Kingdom. One of the early studies by the team of consultants brought out the Hindu-Muslim differential in infant mortality in Howrah. I had co-authored the project's Community Environmental Management Strategy and the Action Plan for Municipal Environmental Services Improvement under that project included a pilot project in slum clusters of Howrah. I was entrusted with leading this pilot project, which worked from December 96 to July 97 in 3 municipal wards of Howrah, on installing hand pumps, repairing drains, and replacing insanitary service latrines with sanitary toilets, all in cooperation with the Howrah Municipal Corporation, the local councillors and ward committees, as well as slum-based community organizations. Following the successful completion of the pilot project, I established a non-profit organization, Howrah Pilot Project, to initiate a long-term grassroots-based program of awareness and leadership for community environment among educated community youth, who I began mentoring before handing over the reins of the organization to them. In the course of this first-hand grassroots immersion, I was able to figure out that the Hindu-Muslim infant mortality differential was actually a proxy for the slum-non-slum differential in environmental health. Insanitary environments in slums endanger health. Access to potable drinking water and sanitation emerge as key factors of life. And the overwhelming majority of Muslims in Howrah resided in bastis or slum settlements. My engagement in Howrah was thus an initiation in and an initiation of biopolitics. Ranabir writes on page 34, speaking of the connection between revolutionary politics and biopolitics from below, we must remember then that patient organization for revolutionary politics bears fruit among the subaltern classes only when it is able to give shape to political issues as being those of life itself. And in page 66-67, the form of the basti, chawl, slum, shantytown, and squatters' colony, the mixed form of the legal and illegal settlement, is an eternal hotspot for civic management. It is the breeding ground of biopolitics from below. On page 38, we read, Is it not true that the horizontal solidarity we speak of here is not merely a spiritual congregation for salvation, but a mobilization for war, a kind of civil war where lower classes have gathered in a loose formation against the enemy? Who is the enemy? It may be the state, a despot, an order, a regime, a race, a community, a new control system being put in place, or a new system of punishment. The mobilization is not a strategy, it is an event. It is contingent on time, the specific configuration of politics at that time. In other words, the specific nature of the crisis. I could not help remembering when I read this para that in 2006, 2007 in Kolkata and West Bengal, there was a movement of people across the state which culminated in the big People's Rally in November 2007 that signaled the end of left front rule in West Bengal. On page 45, we read about the othering of Naples and the discourse on the backwardness of Naples and its criminality. Some 30 years ago, I had written about the depiction of Calcutta, more specifically its native quarters, during the colonial era, most notably by Rudyard Kipling in his book The City of Dreadful Night. I had contrasted Kipling with the views of the poet Ghalib, who had a tender remembrance of Calcutta several years after he returned to Delhi. On page 46, we read again with reference to Naples, the issue of biopolitics was at the heart of public space, citizenship, and renewal, and urban renewal. That brought to mind something by Alexander Kluge that I had read in the late 1980s. Public space is the factory of politics. And despite the neoliberal times and relentless marginalization, the urban poor of Kolkata continue to lay claim on public space for life-sustaining ends, whether it is livelihood or drying clothes, to protest or to demand justice. I salute Ranabir Samaddar for this tract. It is a historic work and I take pride in being present on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramaswamy, for very interesting comments. May I now request Professor Arup Kumar Sen to make his comments.
The previous two speakers. The previous two speakers have talked about the different dimensions of the book, so I don't have much to add. So let me try to reflect about the theoretical implications of the theoretical location of this journey of Professor Samaddar. So the central theme that he has planned to, the central theme that he has planned to explore in the book, to put it in his own words, that biopolitics from below is an attempt to theorize the politics of the popular classes. So there are there may be different modes of theorizing the politics of the popular classes, but he has situated himself in a particular tradition. So because the title suggests that biopolitics from below, that as we know that biopolitics is a Foucauldian concept, so naturally he has contrasted or juxtaposed the biopolitics from below, because he has argued in the book that biopolitics from above made its counterpart in the biopolitics from below. So though it is a biopolitics, but I think that in my reading, the Professor Samaddar's text or imagination of biopolitics from below should be read in the Gramscian mode, because he has himself has given an indication in the text that he has quoted he has put a small part from the Gramsci's Southern question, that the residual question of the popular classes that bourgeois politics is unable to digest. That means in Gramsci's theorization, domination is never total, there is always scope for resistance. And so these biopolitics from below, which coexist with biopolitics from above, it happens in Professor Samaddar's reading in extraordinary times. That means not in normal times, but in extraordinary times. And no one knows that, and biopolitics from below takes different meanings in different historical moments. And no one knows the outcome of this biopolitics. So it is, Professor Samaddar has imagined it as, in his earlier writings also, he posed politics as war in contemporary times. And while talking about the central focus is biopolitics in our time, in neoliberal time, but while reading biopolitics from below in the Indian context, he has brought the genealogy of this biopolitics 50 years back, particularly during the Naxalite years or the street fighting years of the 1970s of the last century. So, and this, how politics took the shape of a social war, so that is clearly visible here. So, there are two, he argued that 1970s may be characterized in two ways, from two perspectives. One, a turbulent decade for the ruling classes. This is a biopolitics from above. And a decade of rebellion for the insurgents. So naturally, and what happened, if one goes through the history of that time, that how the movement, or particularly the radical movement of the 60s and 70s, was crushed by the state with ruthless coercion, and and then what happens, that people were appropriated in the politics from above, because the Indira Gandhi came to power and gave the slogan of Goribi Hatao. So naturally the people became incorporated in the administrative discourse, and the culmination of that is that what happened during the emergency 1975, 1977, forced sterilization, but it was not a total control. The state tried to control from above, but there were resistance. And Professor Samaddar argued that in 1971, in the wake of this massive state repression, so the outcome came much later, because in 1977, in the post-emergency, the Indira Gandhi lost elections, right? So there are many uncertainties, no one knows, and regarding these biopolitical subjects and mobilizations from below. So I have to check that. I have so much heard about from others that horizontal mobilization, but perhaps Professor Samaddar indicated this mobilization may be horizontal or vertical, the both ways. So there is no standard theory of reading, so it depends on historical moments in which the mobilization takes place. So, but the central focus, I will speak a few words about our time, because the central focus of the book is biopolitics from below in neoliberal times. And the central subject of these biopolitics from below in neoliberal is, of course, the migrants. And Ramaswamy has indicated that the site of biopolitics, the slums and the living quarters of the migrants, the mobile population, and the slums exist side by side, the elite quarters or administrative buildings and all that. So the city space is a contested one. So naturally, the city space is a contested one. So, and this contest takes place at various levels regarding right to the city, or regarding the claim making. It is politics of claim making also embedded in this biopolitics of is a context, or it is a context of claim making. So I would just argue that the Professor Samaddar has argued in the book, about which I say something, that he has argued that shift in the gravity of unrest or rebellion from the factory space to the space of the locality or neighborhood, and the shift is in major emphasis of the demands of the lower classes from wage-related issues to life-related issues. That means politics of neighborhood, because the site of biopolitics from below is basically the neighborhood, or so naturally the life question comes, and during the COVID-19 mobilization, he has particularly in mind his focus the COVID-19 situation. That's why he has focused on the life question of the neighborhood. But I think that this the straightforward argument that the shift of gravity from the factory space to the space of the locality and the shift in major emphasis of the demands of the lower classes from wage related issues to life related issues may not be the universal case, because it may be the case. I have in mind that the Maruti Suzuki labor protest in Gurgaon, where the mobilization took place in the neighborhoods, but it was intimately connected with the factory space. So naturally, how the wage question is also a life question. So they are not binaries, but I would not blame Samaddar. Samaddar, he argued particularly in the context of the COVID-19 situation or in the general situation, but there may be cases when the wage question gets connected with the life question, so they are not binaries. And what I am emphasizing, and this argument is very much embedded in Professor Samaddar's theorization, that there is nothing a priori in this biopolitics. It happens in extraordinary times and can take different meanings. It may take a revolutionary form, or it may be also take a right-wing turn. As we know that how the populist politics are being appropriated by the right-wing state, all of us witnessing that. So there is no closure. So that is very important. And I should argue that, and Professor Samaddar, while imagining the alternative forms of public power in this emerging biopolitics, but he talked about the different alternative modes of imagination of power in the Marxist mode. That means how Marx imagined a commune as the alternative of power, how the Soviets were imagined in the Lenin's experiment in the Bolshevik case, and how Gramsci conceptualized factory councils as an alternative mode of power coming from below. So this text, in my reading, is very much rooted in the Gramscian tradition and broadly in the Marxist tradition, though the by name one can identify it because it is biopolitics from below. So in a Foucauldian mode, and I feel that there are different modes of reading Foucault also. And Professor Samaddar has read there may be a mainstream reading of Foucault regarding cultural politics, but his reading of Foucault is very much materially rooted. So though while theorizing biopolitics from below, he initially clarified that what Foucault meant biopolitics, basically which he called biopolitics from above, that how population is subject to various statistical mechanisms and other regulatory mechanisms. But the book ended with Foucault. So naturally it is a radical reading of Foucault, I should say. I will just conclude with his last quotation from Foucault. It is fragmented, I am quoting in a fragmented mode. So Foucault argued in his 1982 published text in Critical Inquiry bearing the title The Subject and Power, quote, "These struggles are not exactly for or against the individual, quote unquote individual, but rather they are struggles against the, quote, government of individualization." That means what is happening through Aadhaar and other things. That means because this mode of documenting citizens, that means this is as a neoliberal subject or neoliberal subject population. So embedded in this notion of subjectification is breaking up communities. So naturally, it is a very nuanced reading of power, and I think that this Donabhidda text is apparently a small book, but I have read once, but I have to read number of times. There are many theoretical nuances, as Samata indicated, that he borrowed from Marx is there. He borrowed from literature also. While talking about the lower level biopolitics, he drew from Sadatos's Montos regarding sex workers and all that, their subjectivity and all that. He borrowed from Machiavelli and all that. But broadly speaking, I think in my reading, because ultimately the author, in a roundabout sense, that author is dead once text is in circulation. So in my reading as a reader, this text should be situated in the radical Gramscian tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Arupda. So author is not dead. We would now like to hear from the author himself. So it is Professor Samaddar.
Arup had
Kill
helped
me.
and now again you are resurrecting him.
So we have to resurrect you to have your response.
No, there is nothing to defend. Sorry. Whatever I had to write, I wrote, and I have maintained that the author should never be asked to comment on his or her books because the book is there and therefore not on the book.
The writing of the book.
But that is a good point. And while I was listening to Samata, Ramaswamy and Arup, and I knew that Sabyasachi would turn to me in spite of Arup making me dead. So I was traveling through the months when I was writing, and later on took a year almost to revise it. I wrote it in 3 months or less than 3 months, but I took a year to revise. So I was revisiting the time as well as the aspects that friends Samata, Ramaswamy and Arup have brought out. So I can only share with you some of my own reflections, not on the book, but what I felt, and I think they have captured in a very fine way some of the aspects. One is, of course, Ramaswamy's comment that it is written with passion, and I was thinking, is it true? So let me tell you the secret history of writing the book. Whatever secret is there, it is that when I got the chair of Marseille University on necessary utopias, so I did not think much in terms of accepting it, but I had to think a lot about how do I connect with the theme of the chair, the necessary utopias. And necessary utopia is is a term, of course it's a philosophical term in the literature on utopia, and those who have read the original utopia would know how the phrase has been coined. And I had to think in terms of what I have been doing and the connection between the idea of the necessary utopia and the way people keep on conjuring up utopias while failing constantly in realizing the utopias. Utopias are always there because they are not realized completely. If they are realized, then there would be no utopias. So two things emerged at that time. One was that, can we say that because utopias fail, and because of this remorseless attraction of the idea of utopia, that something that possibly may be realized, but we do not know. We never know that utopias will be realized. And because we have this suspicion, we have the misgivings that they will never be realized, that we run after them. Is it then the case? And if that is it, then how does one socially construct such an account? So I wrote the proposal, back and forth some communication, and then I landed in Marseille. And I got some money as research money, apart from the fellowship money. And the first thing that I did was invite friends, because the money is always given for purposes of crony purposes. If it is not crony capitalism, at least let it be crony knowledge production. So I invited Sabyasachi and Paula and two others, Shomita from Cambridge and a friend from Athens. We had a discussion there, and therefore my date is to the four participants, there were other participants, but my four friends whom I invited, and that discussion helped me quite a lot. And the passionate part came, again, this reply will not be a passionate reply. For that, you always require a special occasion. Came from this, and I do not know whether I'll be able to explain myself clearly. You see, people think that we think passionately, and then we write in a calm manner. And this is at least Plato's understanding of writing is this. Plato says that thinking is a different language. The language of thinking and the language of writing, they are not same. And Plato's famous thesis is that when you write, when mankind learned to write, Plato says that mankind invented completely a different language. Writing is something different. So when I started writing, I had, of course, what Samata traces, my own understanding of migrant politics, migrant agency, something that Samata did not mention, but factored very heavily our research on Rajarhat. But Samata has mentioned rightly the question of the neoliberal city and the migrant in the making of the city. So the urban backdrop was evident there in my mind. But as I started writing, and this is where the classical philosophical accounts prove themselves to be only half true, that of course, then I started thinking in a different manner, but fortunately or unfortunately, the writing became passionate, whereas it should have been probably more analytical, etc. So it was the whole clarificatory moment, or those 2-3 months of self-clarification of what I was writing, and was it making sense, and did it have connection? And I didn't have the chapterization plan, so those whoever are doing PhD must not then follow me, because I did exactly the opposite of what PhD students are advised to do. Write your introduction last, where I wrote it first, because I thought this is how I encapsulate what I want to say. Even though I made I had no chapterization plan. The only requirement of the publisher was that, and it was a plan that it was a publishing house with 30 years of the publishing house, and a famous publisher was brought in from UK, and they had plan of writing, bringing out 30 books, and the idea was that it should not be more than 130 or 140 pages, small tracts. And if you can avail of that, there is a very good book by Eric Fasson, the one that came before my book in the same series, which again, Eric Fasson doesn't mention the word biopolitics or etc., but if you read Eric Fasson's account of the evolution of Republican France into Macron-led France, you will see what he's saying. So the constraints were only very few. There was nothing. And I kept on thinking. And the problem that I faced in terms of writing, therefore Sabyasachi asked that, tell us about your writing, was that while I was, passion in a way was leading me forward, but there was a conflict that I had to always wade through, which is the conflict between a historical understanding of what I want to say and a logical understanding of what I want to. Those two are not same. History is never moved by logic. On the other hand, you can always say, I've dispensed with logic, then you have dispensed with everything. But how do you integrate them into the same account? And fortunately, I reread, let us say, some of the finest books of 17th century Europe, and some of the very good accounts of the pre-partition and the partition times of South Asia, including Bangladesh and Pakistan. And therefore, you may on one hand read Christopher Hill's, let us say, the that forgetting I remember only the subtitle, The World Turned Upside Down, which may have been the title. That is the title, okay, good. And the subtitle is, if I am not wrong, it is, again, I'll remember. So, or the classic account of the revolutionary Atlantic, where there are very early accounts of very early slaves who were white slaves and who were not black slaves. Early traffic of white poor people who were sent to the New World, quote and unquote, across the Atlantic to found colonies and the kind of desires they had. And there are very fascinating accounts of these histories that have come out. And fortunately, 2022, 23, I managed to get hold of 4 or 5 books. And I must admit that they impacted my understanding of the question. Also, as Samata has pointed out, that I was reading several accounts of the 2 notorious cities of Europe, and only few evenings back I revisited, or again I resaw, as one can say, the French Connection, that famous movie. So Marseille, as you know, is probably the most filmed city of Europe in Hollywood. No other European city has been filmed as much as Marseille, not Paris, not London. And I could therefore see not many, but 3-4 movies on Marseille with English subtitles, but French Hollywood movies, some are also French movies. And I could read also some of the accounts of the sex workers in Naples, but very importantly, some of the accounts of the sex workers in Marseille during the Axis occupation of the city and the Allied bombing and all that. So there were several gradients, as you may say, to the account, and what helped to weave them together. There it was not so much logic but a historical understanding, but that historical understanding comes through, in my case at least, it came through passion. So about how I came to write the book, the only other comment that I would make is that I am not an urbanist, and I am not an urban specialist also. I read it or I study it as I would have studied migration or nationalism. But for various reasons, I have been studying cities maybe for the last 20 years in a completely indigenous way. So, with my own understanding. And what helped me when I was revising the book was the 3 or 4 study sessions that I had to conduct in CRG, if you remember, Foucault's Security Population Territory, which is an account of the birth of the modern city in Europe. And I had to read the book or the series of lectures maybe 3-4 times before I agreed to give those series of lectures. And I found that I agreed with what Foucault said. Obviously 70-80% may not be 20%. But Foucault helped me also to reread Grundrisse in a big way. In Grundrisse, Marx speaks of life, Marx speaks of labor, but Marx speaks of community also in a very big way. That how different life forms are breaking down, new life forms are appearing. And Grundrisse is a very difficult work if you read it by itself. And Grundrisse, even though these are draft manuscript for Capital, but God help them, those who read Grundrisse first and try to read Capital later. So it is only when you have read Capital that you can appreciate the, as is called, the rough draft. And that is, Grundrisse is rough draft. So because I had read Foucault earlier, and I read Grundrisse this time, meaning I had read it earlier, but I could appreciate it and I could learn from it much more after I read it. So that also helped, that you can read books on a platform of ideas where reading one book always helps you to understand another book, even though these books may not be in direct communication with each other. But books do communicate with each other. It's a mysterious thing, but they communicate with each other only in the reader's mind. It's rarely books are written as response to another book. But in this case, I have been asked, and I will end with that, there is a collection of writings published by William Walters and two of his colleagues, and the name of the collection is, it's I think, probably an Oxford University collection, press collection on governmentality. And there, William Walters has noted that the dialogue between Marx and Foucault is essential in order to improve also one's understanding of what Marx wanted to say or said. There is a very good book that has come out a few years back. It is called Marx Inferno. And this book says, along with the other one, I told Paula, because of Paula's work that she was doing on Caliban and the Witch. In this one, Caliban and the Witch is also again something where you get to know the whole idea of biopolitics in the time of primitive accumulation, what happened to the body of the women when they were branded as witches, the entire European medieval politics moving around that, and Marx's understanding of the age of primitive accumulation. But in Inferno, the writer goes deeper because he says that, and I do not know how far this postulate is true, but it doesn't matter because the idea is great. So even if it is untrue, but it can inspire. He says that Marx, even though was a classicist, and even though he had read what possibly one could read in classical European languages, but Marx had taken to Dante like no one else. He says that even though he quoted Shakespeare, he was fond of Homer, everything, but he was at heart someone who was addicted to Dante, and he had read Dante again and again. And he could never forget the whole thing of Inferno. And when he decided to write on the birth of capital, or the genesis of capital and the genesis of proletariat, etc., he could never forget the imagery and that early, how would you put it, very early communist passion of, or denunciation of, not passion, but denunciation of Inferno, where people are put. And when Marx wrote Capital, it was basically along that line that he wrote it. And this is a book is making great risks, and if you can get hold of that. So these are, so in a way, therefore Samata is right, eclectic. Get whatever you can and whatever you think appeals to you, and then up to you, you can read and enjoy them. If you want to write a few lines. No, it doesn't matter if you draw from 100 sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranabir, and thank you for sharing with us, how your thoughts have been translated into writing. So now is the time to congratulate both Ranabir and Paula for these new publications. So give them a big hand. And we conclude this session.